Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. I'm Aaron Cuffle, and today we'll be talking about icons in the Lutheran Church. Do we use them? Do we not use them? What are our theological views on them? So clearly, we do have icons in our sanctuaries. If you look in our churches and our, whatever buildings, we do have icons, especially of Christ. Usually not of the saints, but we are not at all against icons of the saints or icons of Mary or anything like that. We kind of fall into an interesting via media kind of position, where we do not reject icons. We are not iconoclast. We don't say no icons of Christ can be made because we believe that's heretical, basically. I would say worse than iconodualism, actually. Because what's really saying is it's kind of rejecting the part of the humanity of Christ and saying, oh, you can't make images of him even though he was fully man. In using that logic, you kind of say that his divinity overpowered his humanity, which is obviously incorrect. So I think it tends to fall into that situation, and then also leads to other things like, okay, well then you can't make icons of the Eucharist, for example, because the Eucharist is the true body and blood of Jesus Christ, or unless you're Reformed. If you're Reformed, then you would say, no, it's not, so you can make icons of it, but you would be in the wrong, not the rest of the church, no offense. But we're not iconodualist either, in the sense of we do have icons, just like the iconoduals do, but we do not venerate icons. And this is really because we don't see a early church definition or separation of worship and veneration. Obviously, no Eastern Orthodox, Catholic, Assyrian, Oriental Orthodox, and I believe Old Catholics, they all venerate icons. None of them are going to say we worship icons. They're going to have a separation. I can't remember the two Greek words, but there's a separation between worship and veneration. Problem is this a real difference, or is this a difference that we kind of cooked up in explaining it, right? Is it something that we actually see in the early church and in Scripture, a difference between veneration and worship, or is it something that we separated just so that we can kind of, clarify in these issues? Because I don't really see it in Scripture. I don't see it in the early church. You don't see it in the early fathers. So I do kind of take problem with that idea of venerating it, because I just don't see a separation of worship and veneration. Okay, so then what is the Lutheran position? We call our position what's called the Frankish position, which is what I don't know, it's not an ecumenical council, but it's like it was at Frankfurt in 1794, Council of Frankfurt. I apologize, I just need to look at my notes right there. And it condemned both iconoclasm and iconodualism. And what it said was we should have icons in the house and in church, but it should be used for instruction and like teaching practices and in remembrance, right? Like when you see an icon of a saint, you're like, I don't know if you can see them right there, but I have saint on my wall right there. Well, that's not, Origen's not a saint. Origen's at the top, but then I have Saint Basil and Saint Cyril. That's not bad to have. When I look at them, I'm greatly inspired to be, a greater member of the Christian faith, to give back to the faith, to do great things for the faith. I apologize, my cat just opened the door. But so we should have those things in remembrance and instruction, like the cross. Like, for example, this is an argument many people forget. Like, okay, why were icons first introduced in the church? Hey, most people were illiterate, man. They couldn't read. They didn't know how to read. They could barely talk, basically. Yeah, obviously I'm joking, but they didn't know how to read. So having like the Stations of the Cross on the walls or the saints on the walls was actually very helpful. Having the cross, having like the photos of the lamb, having icons of like the Eucharist, or images on like the stained glass, or stuff like that. Like that was extremely useful. And I'm so sorry, my cat is meowing at me. I'm gonna cut this probably, maybe not. But it was extremely useful at the time, and I mean, I still think it is now. When we look at stained glass in our churches, and we see Christ, and we see different things like that, and we see some of the saints, and we see all these things, it's beautiful, and it makes us remember the people that have come before us, that have helped build up our church, and have done great things for us, but they should not be venerated. And well, I have two quotes here which are Orthodox sources, but they do apply for the whole of kind of apostolic Christendom. I just want to kind of read them to kind of show you what I'm talking about and how they feel about icons. So the first quote is, "The honor which is paid to the image passes on to that which the image represents. And he who reveres the image reveres in it the subject represented." Obviously, I'm going to have a problem with that because I don't see that anywhere, right? It seems like we've kind of arbitrarily just said that and be like, yep, that's how it works. There's no, right? There's no, in the Bible doesn't say anything about that. In the early fathers, it doesn't say anything about that. Most of the early fathers, a lot of the early fathers were iconoclast, which we can talk about in a little bit, right? Because I don't know how fully true that is. But I see that as a problem because there's nothing prior to kind of this council that's saying that we can do it, or that's how it works. There wasn't like, in 280 there wasn't being like, deep theology of icons and how they should be used, really. Partially because there were no icons in the first 300 years of the church, really, because it was illegal, so people had to hide no icons, because an icon would give you away and be killed, which is another problem why I have, like, how the council, what is the word, like, if you don't kiss the icons, bow down the icons, venerate the icons, you're kicked out of the church, basically. There's a word that starts with an A, I can't think about it right now, but it's like, that's ridiculous, because by that logic, the first 300 years, all the fathers, or all the early writers, they're not really Christian because they didn't venerate icons. Obviously, the East isn't going to say that. They're going to say they did venerate icons, where Rome will be at least a little bit more historically accurate and say, yeah, it's development of doctrine. They didn't know that. We could develop that now, which I still disagree with. But at least Rome can be more historically accurate. The East cannot. The East has to say the early church venerated icons, or else, there's inconsistency within their church. That means their church isn't held to the Spirit, and it hasn't been fully protected, and that they're wrong, and all these things. Here's the second quote, though. An icon is a link between the eternal and the temporal, serving as an image of the divine world even to the extent that it partakes in the spiritual energy of who it portrays, thereby aiding the worshipper as a bridge or signpost for his own pilgrimage through the early spiritual life. I apologize. Once again, same issue. We don't see a deep theology of icons early on. We don't see really any icons at all. So to make this claim that, like, let me grab it again, that an icon is a link between the eternal and the temporal, we just don't see anything for that. We like, okay, cool, you can cook up some interesting lore, I guess, but that's not what we're doing here. We're trying to look out historically into the early church and see, okay, is this what people believed or not? And obviously, there's some debate about it, because Eastern Rome also likes to say it. A lot of times in pop apologetics, they'll be like, all the ecumenical councils, everyone agreed, and when you reject one of these things, you reject everything that the early church stand for, and all these things, which it really isn't true. Certain things, I would say, yeah, like the two natures of Christ is obviously correct. The full divinity and humanity of Christ, I would say certainly. But like with this issue, they'll be like, there was no debate. Everyone venerated the icons. Well, not really true, right? A lot of people didn't venerate icons, and there was, like, for example, I kind of disagree with this example. You see the writings of Tertullian. I really don't think he's talking about icons. I've read what he said. I really do think he's talking about in the way of building, like, statues of Christ or the saints and offering food to them and offering gifts to them and stuff like that. I really don't think he's talking about iconography as, like, kissing a photo of Christ. I really don't think so. I think some of his logic against it still applies, but I think, like, people will be like, Tertullian was iconoclast. I don't know if I'd say that. I would say, my apologies. I would say he was warning against a form of idolatry that did not develop, but it could have possibly developed, and he could have fought against that. But I really don't think he's talking about iconoclasm in the same way that we now, in the 21st century, talk about iconoclasm at the early councils, the Second Council of Nicea. Okay, so the two other people that I wanted to talk about quickly was Eusebius. Eusebius has, I don't want to say a strong case, but a very strong argument against icons. It's, I don't want to go into too much depth here because I do want people to read it for themselves. I think it's very useful. I think it's very interesting. I think you can find it on, like, early Christian writings. There's some other websites where you can find his writings about icons. I think that writing is enough to maybe not be theologically strong, but enough to show that many people in the early church, early medieval church, were not iconodualist. I think it shows enough to do that. And I would say one other argument that I've seen by some Protestants that hold to the Frankish church, or standard, the Frankish council that we do, is use an argument from John of Damascus and say that while his argument that say that that he defended icons, but not in a way that led to iconodualism, have to disagree. I think he's very much iconodualist, and that's okay, right? The church fathers aren't always going to be right on every issue. That's okay, right? They're not infallible, and neither is a council. Not all councils are infallible. Obviously, the seventh one, I would say, is not heretical, but heterodox, venerating icons. I would say it's wrong. But I would say, like, some people I've heard say that. One who, I'm not at all trying to start beef. I'm not at all anything like that. It's something I kind of disagree with. Jordan B. Cooper, great Lutheran YouTuber, amazing guy, excellent content, deeply inspires me. So I totally look up to him. Great content. But he kind of he's mentioned in the past, don't know if he holds to this, he's mentioned in the past on a video about icons that he believes John of Damascus' argument can support the use of icons without being iconodualism, and I just don't see that. He really does. He's really hard on the separation of worship and veneration, which as Lutherans we don't hold to. So I find it very problematic to say that, because I just don't think it's in the text. I don't think it is. I think when reading that, you have to avoid quite a bit to try to come to that conclusion. I think he's just iconodualist, and that's okay. I'm not holding that against him, right? Because there were other people at the time that did hold our same position, right? Obviously, Council of Frankfurt, we do see that. But John of Damascus, he's an iconodual. Like, let's not historically, let's not fibble with it too much. Let's just say, like, yes, he was. But yeah, I just kind of want to talk about that, because I do see a lot of controversy, not controversy, but a lot of conversations between, do Lutherans accept the Seventh Ecumenical Council? I know a lot of Anglicans do. Obviously, all Roman Catholic, the apostolic churches do. You see a lot of other Protestants be like, meh. I think most Protestants, when you're looking at it, I think most Anglicans, besides maybe like very high church or very like Anglo-Catholic, I think most Anglicans, most Lutherans, most Methodists, Pentecostals are weird, so I'm not even going to include them. I think most Baptists even would hold to the first 6 ecumenical council, but the 7th rejected, because I do think it goes wrong. I think it goes astray. We can talk more about the ecumenical councils another time. I want to do one on miaphysitism at one point, because I think it's very interesting. Not monophysitism, but miaphysitism. Kind of been some confusion in history about that, but I do want to talk about that in a further episode. But yeah, that's all I really had to talk about today, and I hope you have a good day, a good week, a good month, a good year, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye-bye.
Us